All right, so let me put this link up here. And like I said, I'll throw this up onto Facebook, or excuse me, YouTube. But here's the notes that we're going to be covering today. Now, this is not at all like everything they're going to test on. Like, I don't know. And I was just say, go download the statutes, go download the regulations, and look them over. That's the best way to prepare for this test. This test is a bear, man. It's rough. Have you taken the national yet?
Yeah, I've taken both of them, and thank God. I don't know how it happened, but passed both of them on first try. So
fantastic, man. That is great news, man. That is awesome. Congratulations. This is the last little thing. You get done this, and then once this is done, it takes about 2 weeks for them to process. And then you can schedule for the practical exam. Where are you interning?
I'm Vanderplat Funeral Home up in Wyckoff.
Okay, fantastic. You have to have the 75, 75, and 25 done, and then you once you get done this last exam, boom, you can schedule that practical, and then you are as good as gold as far as getting that license.
Perfect.
So let me share my screen with you. I am so surprised when my students showed up, but it is what it is. So, all right, there you are. All right. So if you hear music from the background, my kids are watching some show and they're playing Guns N' Roses. They're 4 and 7. They should be listening to Guns N' Roses. I don't know. It's a new world, man. I don't know. But all right, so the jurisprudence exam, right? It's straightforward. You sit down, it's all multiple choice. When I took it, it was all true and false, which was bonkers, the type of questions they would ask. But go back and review the statutes and the regulations. And both of those are listed on the state board's website. You can download it all. They used to send these books out, and the books were like, it was like 130 pages. It's a lot, but go back and review these things. Okay. That's the most important thing. And I don't know if they have a law class at Macalester or not. Do they have a law class concerning like New Jersey law or anything like that?
They had a law class, but it was for everybody. But it was kind of, get your own state regs, read them and everything like that. And then I had Donald Sambor, he's now the director over there, or that. Okay. Joe McCaus, but he's out of Bayonne, and he's just like, and he, sidebar conversation with him was, just so you know, I'm a funeral director in Jersey, so don't try to, skate your way through this. I know the rules for Jersey. So
I got you. He's right. It's a lot. There's so much that they pack into New Jersey, and and like I said, this is not fully comprehensive. I just give you, and I've gotten feedback over the years. Students have said, hey, it really helped me, but I can't say because I don't know what the answers are. They're given at Mercer, but it's just, we are geographically centered in the state. So they have a contract with the state board saying we'll get the state board, so our testing center gets it. And I have begged Susan Collins, who works there, can I please, Amy Collins rather, can I see it? She's like, no, you cannot see it. So I don't know what's on it, but I just, over the years, feedback, stuff like that, I've put this together. So let's see what we have in here. And I just try and hit the high points. Like I said, I can't get, but at Mercer, it's normally like a 97-98% pass rate on this thing. Okay. So I'm hoping I'm giving you good information.
So
all right, the statutes versus regulations. Remember, there's a difference. The statutes have to go through the legislative body. They have to go through Senate and whatnot, and the governor has to sign off on them, all that good stuff. Regulations, they can change whatever they want at the state board level, right? So things like what instruments are required in the prep room. Well, the state board can change that willy-nilly. They don't care. When we were talking about food in the funeral home, that had to go to the governor's office. So remember, there's a difference between the two. And you don't have to remember the numbers, like 45-1, 45-7. You don't need to remember those numbers, but this is where you find all of that. And this is where you review it all. So other examples, and again, all just stuff to you're not going to be tested on these numbers. They're not going to say what is, New Jersey statutes annotated 26. They're not going to say this is just where it all comes from. Corporate names. Okay, if you have a funeral home and you own it and it's Brand X Funeral Home, but your last name is not Brand X. Oh, okay, well, this is where it comes from. And you need to file paperwork to say, oh, okay, we are trading as, So this is just where all of these things come from, but you don't need to remember these specific, NJSA, whatever. You don't need to remember that. So again, remember, there's a difference between a license versus certificate of registration. A COR is for the funeral home, right? A license for the funeral director. And remember, the license gets renewed on odd years. And I always remember this. And this way I remember when I took the test. Funeral directors are oddballs. Every funeral director I know is an oddball, right? So that's on the odd years. The even years is the COR, the certificate of registration for the funeral home. Death certificate versus a burial permit or a transit permit. And remember, in New Jersey, all you need to do is click that little magic button saying, yes, we are using public transportation on this. And boom, it magically becomes a transit permit.
Right.
So, and again, in New Jersey, remember, a license is required for everything. Not every state is like this. Like not Pennsylvania, Florida, for example, is crazy with this. Like anybody can sell pre-need down there. In New Jersey, you need that license to be able to do anything. To sell merchandise, to arrange a funeral, to sign forms. And remember, the forms that are involved in this, the statement of funeral goods and services. If you're talking about pre-need, remember, and we'll get into pre-need in a bit, but everything that's required pre-need, you need that funeral director's license to do it. To sign a death certificate, to embalm, unless you're an intern under the supervision of a funeral director. At disposition. Now, this was relaxed during the pandemic, but they've pulled it back. For a little while, they were allowing interns to take bodies to the crematory and things like that. They've pulled that back, right?
Yep.
I don't think you'll see questions on that because it's still so new, But in any sense, by the letter of the law, if you're an intern, you can't take a body to the crematory. You can't take a body to the cemetery. You can't do any of that stuff. Now, as far as supervising visitation, dress, casket, or removal, you can absolutely do that without a license. We use, are you heading out?
Yeah.
All right.
4-4.
Oh, we're tied 4-4?
Mhm.
Oh, boy. Sorry, I'm getting updates on the Phillies game. What inning is it?
Bottom of the fifth.
Ooh, all right. They could squeak it out. What are you gonna do? I live right in the outskirts of Philly. So, are you a Phillies fan, an Eagles fan? Are you a Giants fan? Are you?
I'm more of a Jets fan, but I hate.
My apologies. My apologies, sir. That's a hard team to root for. So, but in any sense, like I said, normally I'd be in my office, but my wife is heading off to the Board of Education. Anyway, so yeah, but supervising, visitation, dress, casket removal. No, like I work for a funeral home and they use a removal service and none of them are licensed. And it's fine. It's in New Jersey, it's fine. Delaware is a completely different subject altogether. You need to have a license to make a removal. It's just kind of crazy to me, but whatever. But yeah, you can run a visitation, you can run a memorial service, you can do any of that stuff without that license. But if there is a body in a casket, you need a funeral director there. Well, okay, let me rephrase that. If there's a body in a casket that is going to a cemetery, you need a funeral director there. If it's just a 7 and 9 at the funeral home, fine. You can have an unlicensed person do it. But it's just when you go to that point of disposition, you need a funeral director there. So like I was saying before, biennial license renewal, even on the funeral home and odd with the personnel. So like I said before, all funeral directors I know are oddballs. So on the odd years, that's when they re-up it. And we need to re-up, like I need to re-up mine next year. It's just the way that it is. Renewal expectations, the continuing education. Remember, you need 10 credits. 5 of those credits have to be in person. They have to have, the specific ones where you're talking about OSHA and you're talking about Sorry, I'm listening for my kids who are fighting upstairs. But anyway, yeah, they have to be over those specific topics. OSHA, legal requirements, things like that. And the other 5 can be whatever you want. A license lapse. Now, there used to be a weird renewal thing where outside of 5 years, you could come back and you could renew your license. You move out of state, you get into a different line of work, whatever it is, and it's 5 years later, and they would have you come back and you would make up the credits that were missing, right? So it'd be 25, up to 25 credits. And you figure 10 each semester, each year. So it'd be 10, 10, and then 5 for the last. Stop, sweetie. Sorry, give me just a minute.
No problem.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Like I said, I've my kids here.
No problem. Get it. I get it.
Yeah. So again, that renewal expectations, the continuing ed, you need to know that they will be asking you questions about that. And that license lapse, like I said, it used to be a 5-year thing, and they changed this altogether. And we'll get into that in 2019. They changed all the legislation on this.
Okay.
So new for 2019, pre-need providers must monitor attendance and ensure completion of the lessons. And if I don't know if you've been down to the convention or not, but when you go to the convention, they zap your little the little ID tag thing that you have. And if you step out for more than 10 minutes, you can't get those credits. And they've always sort of done this to a degree. Like I remember like in I'll say like 2014 or something, I went to an OSHA training thing. And that's the most boring stuff you ever have to sit through. It is brutal. And I was an hour and a half through it. We put a house call on. I was like, geez, I had to leave. When I came back the next month to do it again, I had to sit through the whole thing again, and it's just what they do. They monitor it, and you have to be there the whole time. And the CEU instructor must maintain records for 5 years. Stupid things. And they love to test you on times, like how much time do you need for this? How much time do you need for that? How much time do you need for the, it's one of those deals that anytime you see a time frame, like how long do you need to keep these records? Like OSHA requires you to keep the records for 30 years after somebody leaves. So if somebody's at a funeral home for 10 years, they leave, and then it's 40 years you would need to keep those records. So inactive license, this was a thing up until 2019. They dropped this all together, and this was like a buddy of mine has a funeral home down in way in South Jersey, down in Vineland. And his grandfather still wanted to be included in the advertising, and they made his license inactive. They did away with all of that in 2019. Why is there an active license, or it's done altogether? Used to be you could just have it there for advertising purposes, where they could come in and they could work a viewing and people say, oh yeah, John, nice to see you, that type of thing. They've done away with all of that. So that license lapse, like I was talking about, less than 5 years, it used to be you'd have to complete all the different continuing education up to 25 hours, and you would have to pay the vast fees. What they dropped it down to now is, yes, if you're inactive for 5 years,
Mike, I lost you.
sorry, I'm yelling at my kids.
Oh, no, sorry, I thought you were just talking.
No, I'm yelling at the kids. They're fighting with each other. Like I said, 4 and 7. It's God bless them, but I don't know. My wife gave them a bunch of candy bars earlier. Now they're bouncing off the walls.
There
And she
you
went out to I didn't realize she had a Department of Education meeting. Otherwise, I would have like scheduled this a different night. But now what they do is they just go, no. If, even if we're after 5 years, right? 5 years is that marker. You can still come back, and you just need to make up the CEUs and the fees for the past year, right? So it's just the previous year and this year. So they go, okay, you can go up to 5 years, but it's just that previous year that you need to pay. And the same thing with the CEUs. So it's not 25 CEUs you need, because you would need, like I said, if you think about it, for any licensing period, 10 and then 10 and then 5 for half of it. They just go, no, you just need to make up the last months and you're fine. And the same thing with the fees. Like you just need to pay the fees for last year and do the CEUs for last year, and then you're good. Again, lapse of more, and now I don't think you're gonna see questions on this. This is a weird thing. They always said if it was more than 5 years, so you leave the industry for 5 years or 6 years, you take another job, you do something else, whatever, you come back, and what they always said was, okay, you had to do the everything before. You needed to pay all of the you need to take the CEUs, you need to pay the previous fees. And then you need to do a mini internship of 3 months to a year, but they never explained how they decided on any of this stuff. And what they just decided was, no, the state board would just decide applicants on a case-by-case basis. So you leave the industry, you get licensed, you're out for 8 years, let's say, and you come back, well, they'll just figure it out willy-nilly. They don't give us any explanation on it, but they changed this in 2019 and just said, whatever, we'll figure it out on a case-by-case basis. All right, so record keeping. So you need to take a look at record keeping. So any record regarding the funeral, you need to keep for 7 years, right? And they need to be available to the state board. The last 12 months need to be available immediately. The previous 6 years need to be available within 2 weeks. So you need to know what goes into each of those records. Winnie, knock that off. If I see it again, I'm putting you to bed. Sorry. It's one of those deals. Like I said, I didn't plan it this way. I didn't realize my wife had a commitment tonight. But you need to keep it. The previous year needs to be available to the state board inspector shows up. You need to have them available for them immediately. The previous 6 years can be stored off of the facility if you've got a storage facility or something. I know most funeral homes have records going back to like the 40s or whatever, but on paper, you need to have the previous 6 years available within 2 weeks to them. Itemization, and going back to that idea of FTC, did they give you the FTC compliance book? Okay, good. Review that before you take it, and review that before you take the national board exam. You did say you passed the national, right? Yeah, you passed both halves of it, right?
Yeah.
Did you see a lot on the FTC, just out of curiosity?
There were some, but not as much as I thought. but there was some questions on it.
Easy enough. It tends to pop up since it's a national thing. They tend to, they tend to, but you're going to see it again on the state exam, or you're very likely to see it. It's not a bad idea to review that again. And to know like the 6 disclosures on the price list, as well as the 3 on the statement of funeral goods and services. It's always good to know all of that stuff. Now the prep room expectations, right? So there's a whole list of instruments that you need to keep in the prep room, right? Things like having at least one trocar, at least one aneurysm hook, things like that. You need to know all of them. They've backed off on this, I think, in the last couple of years, but it's low hanging fruit. It's good to know before you go in there to take it. And they've got a whole list right in statute. And not in the statute, in the regulation. Yeah. And there's other things about it, like it has to have odd things. It has to have walls or floor to ceiling. It has to be used solely as a prep room. You can't have it as a prep room and then on a viewing, you move things around, you make it the ladies' restroom or something like that, right? Like you can't do that, so you need to just review all of that stuff. And most of it is pretty much common sense, other than that list of instruments that you need. It's good to know that and what you're not allowed to have in there. Like the inspector showed up one time and I had a whole bunch of chairs, the extra chairs that you keep in funeral homes. And I had a whole bunch of chairs in there because we needed to make room. And I was trying to move around and just try and get somebody to distract them while I was taking them out the back door, because you're not allowed to store them in there. You can't even store a stretcher in the prep room. A stretcher is supposed to go in, you remove the body off, you remove the stretcher out of the prep room, at least on paper, right? Now, whatever you do with your funeral home is, I'm not asking, but I'm just saying on paper. That's what they want you to do. All right. All right. So new for 2019. Now, most of the stuff is really it's minutia, but I still want to mention it. FTC telephone price disclosures. New for 2019, the manager of any funeral home may designate an employee, even unlicensed, to provide price information on the phone. You can pick one person, be like, you are our FTC person, you are our price info person, you will give out prices to people that call. Like my wife and I both work for a funeral home. She's not licensed, I am. And she just keeps the books and does everything else. But she knows that she's been in the funeral industry for 20 years. She would know how to give somebody prices off of a general price list. So yeah, it's one of those deals. They could designate her as the person that gives out pricing information when somebody calls. When you get the shoppers, well, what's your cost for dark cremation, that type of a thing, responding to questions concerning information not on the price list shall be referred to a licensee or an intern. And they opened this up a little bit and said, well, all right, you've got somebody like my wife is just a secretary, but you also got licensees, and then you also have interns. Interns are allowed to give this information out. They have a better understanding of it, and they can walk somebody through the pricing. So they allowed us they allowed interns to give out pricing information. So multiple ownership. This is an important one. This one pops up all the time. A person who owns 50% or greater interest in this registered mortuary also owns 50% or greater interest in the following registered mortuaries, and then you need to list them. So if you own more than one funeral home, you have to disclose this. And the fear was always that you own 2 funeral homes in a neighborhood. Family walks in, they go, all right, how much is the funeral? And you go, $6,000. And they go, I won't pay more than $5,400. And they storm out, and you own the competing funeral home, and you call them and go, hey, just charge them $5,400. And they walk in and go, we'll charge you $500, $400. They go, that's exactly what we want to spend. It's a ridiculous premise, but that's why they set it up. So, and this comes down to even like I owned 3 funeral homes at one point, and it was myself and 2 other people, and I owned 40%, somebody else owned 40%, somebody owned 20. And so we thought we were exempt from this. Like nobody owns more than 50%. No. We owned interest in the company that owned the funeral home outright. So you have to be conscious of that. It's not so much like if you own a company that owns a funeral home, then that is more than 100%, not more than 100%, more than 50%, and they own the full thing, and you had to put this disclosure on there. So new for 2019, the multiple ownership disclosure only needs to be on the general price list. You don't need to put it on the casket price list and the outer burial container price list. And remember, those do not have to be given for retention. The outer burial container price list and the casket price list. You can just have a display in a casket showroom if you have one or whatever that satisfies it. You can have a pamphlet, a display, whatever. You don't have to give it to them in print, whereas with the general price list, you do. So mortuary use issues. So mortuary shall not be used as a site for recovering organs or tissues, including DNA. This was something that they took very, very seriously in 2019. This got flipped. Now they allow us, we were always allowed to collect a lock of hair, but we can also collect DNA via cheek swab, nail clippings, and or blood collection. And we may be the site of examination to determine the cause and manner of death. And that was always the case. You were always allowed to do this last one, maybe the site of examination to determine cause and manner of death, meaning you could pay a pathologist to come in and do an autopsy. Have you ever had a private autopsy at the funeral home?
Yeah, we've had a couple of them. So let me ask you this,
Sure.
How does it fall for, and we just had a gentleman the other day, for where the brain was donated to science for, is that's not considered the organ or tissue recovery, is it? That's more like the share network thing you're talking about, right?
Well, it is, but that's normally not something that would be done at the funeral home. Was that done at the funeral home?
Yeah.
Did they come out to really?
Yeah. The gentleman came. He was he just retired from Morris County as Morris County ME, and now he works and does not. I mean, it's donated the brain for whatever Alzheimer's, I think it was, over in Colombia, and he came and removed the brain.
Wow. No,
Yeah.
that would fall under this whole idea of DNA, cheek swab, nail clippings, or whatever else for donation. They normally did not allow you to do that in the funeral home. Prior to 2019, they wouldn't allow you to do that. You were allowed to do an autopsy, but no, that opens the door for that. Wow, that's wild. I've never heard of that happening in the funeral home, because normally you're dealing with the sharing network or
Right.
Whatever the one it is in Philly. I'm blanking on the name. But yeah, wow, that's wild. Yeah, prior to 2019, I didn't think you could do that.
Yeah. No, I mean, we did it, like last week he was there. I think there's been a couple, like 3 or 4 of them have come in and done it. Where people
that's something
donate
else.
their brains and stuff. So
wow, like I said, I've always seen the autopsy is done at the funeral home, but the donation always tended to be done at, like I said, the sharing network, or what is one in Philly? Why am I blanking on this?
I'm trying to remember it too.
It'll come to me. It'll pop into my head at some point. But yeah, no, prior to 2019, I don't think you would have been able to do that, because they wouldn't even let you take blood, like a vial of blood, because things have gotten weird, like we'll save DNA and we'll replicate them in 100 years or something like that. But yeah, prior to 2019, you couldn't do anything other than take a lock of hair. That was the only thing you were allowed to do. You couldn't take a nail clipping, you couldn't take blood, you couldn't do anything, and they relaxed it in 2019. It's damn it. If my wife was here, she would remember what they're called, and I'm blanking on it. So food in the mortuary. Do you guys allow food in the mortuary and food at the funeral home?
For visitation, no.
Okay.
We're allowed, as employees, we can, we'll have lunch and stuff like that, but nothing in the chapels, nothing in the morgue. Like I can't even have technically a bottle of water, as per the funeral home says. Your mug of water or coffee, put it in the dressing room, not in the morgue, not where we're doing autopsy.
I get you, and I understand the morgue, but
Right.
I've seen, it's one of those weird things that you see people allowing, like coffee being served and things like that. And that was never allowed up until 2019. They didn't allow any of it. You could not have anything than just water. That was the only thing you could serve. And in 2019, the governor signed a bill, and I don't like our governor, but I agree with this particular one that, all right, people want to bring some food in and have some light snacks or whatever, fine. So but I used to allow people to have like donuts and whatnot, or and some coffee. They'd show up with like a, what is that box of Joe or whatever from Dunkin' Donuts, whatever. But yeah, all of that stuff was not allowed. And yeah, they switched this in 2019 and said, no, you can absolutely, you can't prepare it though, and you cannot have alcoholic beverages. Good luck with that one. When somebody shows up with a bottle of Dewar's or something and everyone's doing shots, you know.
Yeah.
It is what it is, you know. But yeah, after 2019, they said, all right, you may have food and non-alcoholic beverages, but you cannot prepare them at the funeral home. You can't be preparing them there. You can't have a kitchen going where you're cooking all this stuff up. So they're allowed to bring food, but you can't allow them to cook it there.
Okay.
Emily, knock it off. Again, sorry. So again, new stuff as far as 2019, and this is where it's going to start working its way into the test. When this was first passed, I was telling the students, like, don't worry about it. You're not going to see this on the test. It takes 2 or 3 years to work its way onto the test. This is where we are now, right? So you must show evidence to the state board that the ERS account is closed. You must inform the state board of the location, individual in charge of the funeral home records. And it goes back to that 7 rule year that somebody needs to be in charge of these records. The first year needs to be available immediately, at least for that first year. And then after that, you know, within 2 weeks, you have to be able to get them to them, right? So you close a funeral home today. The state board shows up to whoever he handed these records off to. They need to show up. They show up. They need to be able to get those records from 2022 to 2021 immediately. Anything prior to that, you've got 2 weeks to get it to them. Now, once you get out of that first year, you get into 2023, it all becomes 2 weeks. And that 7 years becomes 6 years, and then 5 years, then 4 years, then 3, and it goes on from there. So, all right, preceptor qualifications. Remember, to be a preceptor, you have to have been licensed for 2 years, and you have to have a license of good standing. Now, how many interns? This is a dumb rule. A funeral home can only have 2 interns. And I've had funeral homes over the years that are doing 1,500 calls a year, and they can only have 2 interns. It makes no sense. Whereas another funeral home is doing 80 calls a year, and they can have 2. It makes no sense.
Right.
Now, the way that it works is the funeral home has to be able to do at least 25 calls a year to take an intern. And this goes back to the idea that, let's say you get out of high school, and remember, there's 60 credits that you need prior to funeral service education, right? And that normally takes 2 years. And then you have the year of mortuary school. So that takes 3 years. So if you do 25 calls a year, then over 1, 2, 3 years, if you did every funeral, every embalming, and you handled every case, that would come out to 75 by the end of it, right? So 25, 25, 25 would get you up to the 75. And that's where the logic comes from. Again, the 2 interns per, I think, makes no sense, but the internship specifics, the time, the cases, the background. Remember, you need to have 60 credits prior to funeral service education. And this is also going to tap into that concurrent internship. So you need 60 credits, right? Not great drawing, but that 60 credits during this time, this is the concurrent internship. So somebody gets out of high school, they've done no schooling. I might have misspelled that. I don't think there's 2 N's there. That's your concurrent internship. That's 60 credits. And during that time, students are expected to send transcripts into the state board to show that they're taking at least 8 credits per semester. At the end of the 60 credits, they apply and they get the AQC or the MQC. And it's the same thing It's the academic qualifying certificate or the mortuary qualifying certificate that proves that you have the 60 credits. During that time, it is no longer considered a concurrent internship. And it's something I do not understand this at all, because this would be when you were doing the 39 credits of mortuary science, right? Right, makes no sense, but during that time, you are concurrently doing the internship, but it's not considered concurrent anymore. Concurrent is just if you're doing that first 60 credits. And I don't know why they do it this way, but it's the way that the state board views it. Oh, hold on. So again, remember those internships, the specifics, the 75 embalmings, 75 funerals, 25 sets of funeral arrangements. Are you done all of those?
I have, thank God for COVID. I'm probably one of the few people that like COVID.
I enjoyed it, man. I got to teach from home. I didn't have to drive all the way into Mercer. It was great, man. It was wonderful. I was like, I'll hang out and sit here in my PJs and teach class. It was wonderful. Bring it back. Anyway.
Yeah, I know. Got it all done. And like, I did like the 10 embalmings for school. I had it done within like 4 days.
Okay. Where are they doing the embalmings now? Because I know they used to go to Bellevue, but I thought that there was an issue with that or something.
Yeah,
and I'm not looking for dirt. No.
The issue is they are not allowed. New York State won't allow them to do it. So you have to now do it at a funeral home.
Hmm.
So you have to have a preceptor, and my preceptor for the whole thing has been, he was a former graduate of Macalester. So like, hey, you got a bachelor's degree, good. Yep, you're good. Okay, you can precept him. And all I had to do was call into the head of the education department over there who does the clinical hours. And I said, here's the forms. She's like, yeah, you got to do 10 embalmings. I'm like, okay, you got to call me before you do every one. I'm like, all right, I'll call you in an hour. She's like, what do you mean? I said, I'm going down in about an hour to embalm someone. Really? I'm like, yeah. And she's like, well, don't call me. I said, when will you be done? I said, oh, it's Monday now. I should be done by Thursday, Friday. She's like, not a chance. But okay. Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon, I called her. It was in the afternoon. And I said, I'm all done. What would you like me to do with the paperwork? She's like, are you kidding me? Because there are some funeral homes, I don't know down by you, but like up in Bergen County, some of them during COVID were like, put them in a pouch, sealed casket. That's it. We're not doing any embalmings, direct burials, or cremation. That's it. So no one got a chance to do anything. We were allowed it. They allowed it at the funeral home for us to do it. So we were doing, on average, 2 to 3 embalmings a day.
It was a crazy time. It was a crazy, we couldn't get into a crematory for like 2 or 3 weeks. It was bonkers. But I'm glad they still allowed you to prep, because they did pass that stupid law. Like I said, I'm not a super huge fan of the governor, but he passed some emergency thing saying you couldn't view anybody embalmed in a casket. And it was like, all right, we're not doing that. And we just completely ignored it. But yeah, but good. I'm glad you got all that stuff done. And it sounds like it's the last leg that you need to get done. So let's continue on. So the internship extension. Now the internship is by default 2 years. However, you can get a 3rd year by just sending them a letter. May I have a 3rd year? They go, yes, you may. And they give it to you without an issue, without even questioning it.
Right.
Now, remember, if you have 90 or more credits prior to funeral service education, they drop the minimum down to 1 year instead of 2 years. So by default, it's 2 years. But if you've got 90 or more credits prior to funeral service education, they drop it down to 1 year. But if you need it, they'll move it up to 3 years should you need it. If you fail the state board practical, you got to wait 30 days and reapply. It's just the way that it is. And the concurrent internship, I sort of explained that already. So November 2019, preceptor of Skinnock was victim of crime in 5 years. It's a weird time. Oh, 5 years. You murdered someone 6 years ago? Oh, fine. Whatever. So they say it must be a crime related to funeral service or moral turpitude, being rape or murder, something like that, you know. There, I had a student, I'm gonna pause this for a second, hold on. All right, let's pop up for me. So it must be a crime related to funeral service. If you rip off the, you know, you take the pre-need funds, you run down to Atlantic City and you throw it on black, you know, and whatever. Or moral turpitude. Cannot have revocation, suspension, or surrender of a license from any professional board, meaning that you are if you look at the license of a barber, it looks exactly like ours. They have
Right.
to deal with the same, yeah, let's say they did something awful. Let's say you were a barber and you did something awful and your license was lost. All right, it's going to count against you the same way it would with funeral service. So convictions, arrests, new in 2019, licensees are now required to notify the board in writing within 30 days upon conviction of any crime or arrest, summons, indictment, arresting the pretrial and bench and guilty plea to any violation of law, ordinance, felony, DUI, misdemeanor, or disorderly offense in New Jersey or in any other jurisdictions. Speeding tickets are not included in this. And it used to be you would have to report every other year. So everybody would look to that issue at the forum because they're like, oh, let's see who got arrested these past 2 years. And there's always be some of you know they got a DUI or something. Now you have to report it immediately. It was always previously done upon license renewal. Now within 30 days, I don't know. You get into a fight, you get disorderly conduct, whatever. You need to report that to the state board immediately. If you get a DUI or something, you need to report that to them within 30 days. New stuff for interns and pre-tap versus 2019 state board clarifying the intern's responsibilities, participating in funeral arrangements, preservation, washing, or disposal of dead human bodies, making funeral arrangements on behalf of any licensed practitioner. So meaning that you were licensed under the manager of the funeral home, but he's on vacation. There's another funeral director there and he goes, okay, well, can you make these arrangements? Can you embalm this body? Can you do whatever? You're allowed to do that, although he's not your preceptor. Any licensee you were allowed to work under. Quoting prices when funeral arrangements were made, they just clarified all this and said you can do all of this stuff. You're allowed to do that. You can't sign the statement of funeral goods and services, but you can act on behalf of the funeral director, any funeral director under whom you're working. Preceptor is responsible for reviewing and executing the statement of funeral goods statement of funeral goods and services with the intern before providing to the consumer for review. Meaning, you sit down with the family, you make the arrangements, you write everything up. Nobody signed it. You take it to him, he looks it over, goes, okay, everything's good. And then he signs off on it, or she signs, whoever, and signs off on it, and you give it over to the family and they sign off on it. But they clarified that because it was never clear before. Interns and advertisements, if an intern in ad or website, social media included, to be listed as whatever your name is. So Carl Kofler, registration number, whatever it is, that's the way that you need to be listed. You also need to have that disclosure saying that, and even if you just have an asterisk and you have it down at the bottom of the page, not licensed, not able to make funeral arrangements, embalm or direct services, that's fine, but you need to have that disclosure listed. The forms of ownership, remember, there are different forms of it. Corporate, use of manager name, title, sign, etc. You need to disclose that it is a corporate holding. Even if it's just like I worked for Blake Doyle when I was an intern, and they're an SCI property. It's SCI. It was Blake Doyle, sort of SCI LLC, not LLC, but SCI Corp. Was listed on there. Now, I specifically do not look these up because I expect people to look them up on my behalf because this is the way to learn them. Death of the owner, how long do you have to notify the state board? I want to say it's 5 days, but I could definitely be wrong on that. It might be, it might be 30. God, I teach this every year and I always forget, but I always leave it out of my notes because I go, you know what, you should look this stuff up. New installation, meaning a new owner, right? Anytime that you have a funeral home that you change the ownership, or if you change the funeral home, meaning you move a block down the street, that's new installation. So what's involved in that? What does the state board need to do as far as approving you as a new installation? And it's all stuff to look up. If you close a funeral home, what has to be done? Things like the telephone number needs to be shut down, the sign needs to be covered. What do you need to do with the pre-need accounts? And that's an important one. They changed that one recently, so look that up.
Okay.
Unlicensed owners are absolutely allowed. When I was a kid, my parents owned a funeral home. My dad was licensed. He died in 1985. Between 85 and 88, we had somebody else running the funeral home for us, but my mom was technically the owner. So we couldn't just call ourselves a proprietary institution because it was not a licensed owner owning it. Then in 1988, my mom got licensed, and then we could go back to being a proprietary institution because it was boom, done. It was, we were then, she was licensed and she was allowed to do that, but she was allowed to own it in the interim.
Okay.
So pre-need, again, you need to be licensed to do it. You need signatures on the forms, and take a look at the requirements for the forms, because there are forms that are required as far as an explanation of it, statement of funeral services, but there's also an explanation of where these funds are going. Trust accounts, very much used. I don't know if you use Choices, but that's one of the bigger ones, and it's got like something like $300 million in it. And you know, ultimately, you know, it's all fine to use, but you don't have to use that. You could use your own trust account. You could go to a local bank and just open up account, a POD account, a payment on debit account. You're allowed legally to do that. Send the family down. Okay, here's the funeral bill. It's $10,500. They take that down to the bank. They show it to them. They go, okay, we'll open an account. When the death happens, you show up with the death certificate, you give it to them, and they pay it out to the funeral home. You're perfectly allowed to do it. Not very common.
Right.
You change a funeral home. How much time do they have to change the funeral home? No. We bought a funeral home in 2008. And when you do that, you're inevitably going to get people that leave your funeral home. It is what you have to send that letter out. And that's also something to look at. Like, we've bought the funeral home, you can stay with us, you can leave, you can cash out, whatever. And but you inevitably get people that go, look, I'm going to leave. I just hated getting those letters. And but how much time do you have to transfer it over? Now, in practical terms, it normally doesn't matter. It's normally handled by Choices, whomever you're dealing with. But you need to know the time frame. I want to say it's 10 days, it may be 14 days. Like I said, I always leave these notes blank on this, just so I leave it over to you guys to look it up. The cancellation fee, there's no such thing. You spend 6.5 hours with the family, you can't charge them a penny. They pay you $30,000 on the funeral, but then they transfer you don't get a penny. It is what it is. And again, going back to that idea of 100% pre-need trust, you need to put it in a trust, you need to put it in insurance. You cannot intermingle with your accounts. I had a family come in one time with like $9 grand cash, and it was in like 5s and 20s. So it was a stack like this big. I'm like, I can't take, there's nothing I can do with this. I can't put it into my account and then transfer. I can't do it. Like, it has to go immediately to whomever is holding it, whether it be Choices or an insurance company, whatever. You cannot intermingle those funds. So trust issues, you need 200 accounts to be able to take 1% of the interest on the trust to run that system. So Choices has well more than 200 accounts, but you need to hit that 200, and then they can take 1% of the interest to then run the day-to-day operations, because you need somebody to be sending letters out and tracking everything, but you need to hit that magic 200 number. Commissions, you're allowed commissions in newly issued insurance. If somebody comes in, they've got an old insurance policy, DuPont or something, right? Something dad paid off 35 years ago. There's nothing, even if they cash that out or whatever, or they're moving it over into a different insurance policy, you cannot take any commission off of that. It has to be a newly issued commission, a newly issued insurance policy for the person to take that commission. And then the guy's talking about POD accounts. It's not very common, but it is still legal. Again, going back to 2019, you must notify social services when any refund on irrevocable prepaid funeral is anything. And there's 30 cents left. You need to notify social services and they'll come after that 30 cents. It used to be $500 and higher, and they clamped back on that and said, no, if there's $1 left, you need to let us know. So advertising, again, name has to be as registered. You're registered with the state board as Brand X Funeral Home, and you decide one day, I want to be Brand X Memorial Home. You need to change your name with the state before you can actually do that. And the manager, you always have to have the manager's name, and it has to either be next to the door or on the sign. It doesn't have to be on both. And it has to be, an inch and a half or higher. And if you switch it over, if you want it to be executive director or senior director, that's fine, but you have to pick one and stick with it. So novelty items, if you have a pen that you're giving out that's very small, the writing's small, you need to have the municipality and the funeral home name. So Brand X Funeral Home in any town, USA, right? You need to at least have that on there. They don't need everything else on there. The manager's name, license number, and all that, but you need to have the municipality and the funeral home name. A logo and obits. I believe I have an example of this. Yeah, we'll come back to this. All right, we'll come back to that. Testimonials. You cannot have a testimonial for a funeral home on your website or anywhere else unless the person actually used the funeral home. Like I always drive by, I live by Kerbeck car dealership, and they run ads all the time where it's like, hey, I'm Carson Wentz and I use Kerbeck cars and they're great. You can't do that at a funeral home unless they actually use the funeral home. Oh, we're getting a weird one here. Price reductions. You cannot have, and most funeral homes do not advertise a price reduction. Most of them do not advertise prices, but if they do, they need to have it at least 30 days or before. It has to be the same price or less, meaning that, let me pull up a, all right, so let's say I've got a casket that I'm offering for $600, for $600, right? And I go, all right, well, I'm going to run an ad that I'm taking this $1,200 casket that I just marked up, and I'm going to mark it half off. And you can buy it for just $600. How great is that? What a nice guy I am. Well, no, that's the issue, is they're just marking it up to then drop the price down to where it originally was. And that's the fear of it. And again, this does not happen a lot. It's not very common, but this is the fear. So if you wanted to do this, you would have to mark it up to $1,200. You have to wait 30 days. Then you could run an ad going, hey, buy this casket for $600. I'm giving it to you at 50% off. And that's the fear with it. And again, I think it's silly, but shit is what it is. So logo and an obit. So this was more of a South Jersey thing. You probably don't see this that much up in North Jersey. I know
Right.
you're a northern person in New Jersey. They used to have these ads, and I picked Chinuski out of nowhere. I just went to the Courier Post website and pulled this out. Basically, the way that the state saw this is if you're running something like this, that's an ad. If you're running a logo along with your obits, then you need to pay for that, and it falls under advertising requirements. So you need to have a license, the manager and their license number, and all the other information is required. And so like most funeral homes down here will get two bills from, let's say, the Courier Post, where one is for the family and the other is for the funeral home. That, okay, you ran this ad, now you need to pay for it. But yeah, they back in 06 or 07, they came up with this and said, no, you can't make a family pay for it. If you just run an obit that says in print, Chinuski Funeral Home, 1100 North Black Horse Pike, 7 and 9 on Tuesday, that's fine. But if you're running an ad that has this type of image on it, then no, they don't allow for it.
Okay.
So advertising, and again, this includes everything. Aerial displays. I've never seen an aerial display for a funeral home, but whatever. Circular handbills, flyers, letters, any other similar item, document, publication, or device used to communicate to the general public or to a specific group. News of 2019, all advertising regs extend to funeral home website and social media. So if the funeral home has a Facebook page, if they've got a Twitter page or Instagram or what, I don't even understand Instagram. I really don't understand Twitter, but whatever. Any of that stuff, it all is included in it. So anything you would need to put out there would have to have the funeral home location, their telephone number, and the manager name. So all of that needs to be put in there. So you're putting tweets out, boom, you need to have all of that in there. So fines, the most you can get, first fine is up to 10,000, second and subsequent up to 20,000, but they can also come after you for their inspection fees, or if they need to bring a forensic accountant in or something like that, they charge you for all of that stuff. But those are the magic numbers, and it's good to remember them. I hope you don't get fined on anything ever, but it's just good to know the numbers on that. So interment, so the depth of burial, look up the depth of burial. It's basically, if somebody is in a vault, you can have them all the way up to the top. But I've always considered it an interesting thing because it's 4 feet down. Yeah, 4 feet, because if you think of it being 2 feet, you can think of 6 feet under. They require, if somebody is just going to be buried without a vault, it's 4 feet, and then the soil on top. Temporary burial, you're allowed to have somebody buried temporarily if they're waiting, let's say, for a mausoleum to be built. And you can spend up to, it can be up to 4 years later that they remove them and move them over. And if they do this temporary burial, it has to be marked at the time of burial. But let's say you're waiting for a monument to be built, and then you move the person out of the grave, and up there, they don't need a funeral director there. They don't need anything else. The cemetery can just take the person out and have them moved over to the mausoleum or whatever it is. Multiple burials. You're allowed to have multiple burials in 2 ways. So if you wanted to have, and I had a weird situation, it wasn't me, a student told me actually, he had a couple that was murdered. Somebody broke into their home and killed them. It was a shame. It's kids in their 20s, and they just bought this house and they're painting, and some lunatic showed up and shot them, whatever. But they had them laid out in the same casket. You're allowed to do that. And the order of the right to control goes back to, oddly enough, the decedent. So the legislation was written in the light of, let's say that you're a mother giving birth and you're dying, and you know the child is going to die. You can say, please bury us both together. And then boom, okay, that's fine. They can both be buried together. So it goes from the decedent and then the normal breakdown, the spouse, the children, the parents, siblings, and so forth. Now, with multiple burial, when you get into disinterment, if you have all right, so let's say this is a grave. And again, my drawings are terrible. I do apologize. If you have multiple burials, so this is 2 caskets, right? This is casket 1, casket 2. If you're disinterring casket 2, you need to get all of the permissions from casket 1 to be able to do so, because they do need to pull that person out of the earth, and all of the legislation is written in a way to leave somebody in their respectful, peaceful place of disposition. So you would need to get all the permission from the people here, whether that be a spouse or children or whomever it is, but you need to get that permission before you can do so.
So say you bury some of the in single depth and 3 weeks ago, and then the family's like, well, we want to move things around. Does that single depth casket count as a temporary burial? No.
No, that's a good question. It's a very good question. No, you would need to mark it as temporary at the time of burial.
Okay.
If somebody even changes their mind 10 minutes after the burial, then you need to go through the whole disinterment process.
Okay.
So yeah, this is just an end around for if, all right, you know, we're waiting for this mausoleum to be built. That's the whole angle on it.
Okay.
Back to my sharing. And again, disinterring, here's a weird thing about New Jersey. You need the consent of the spouse and all adult children. I don't understand this. I've never understood this. Somebody dies, and let's say it's wife number 2, and she goes, I want dad buried here. I want John or whatever his name is buried here. As soon as he's buried, in theory, the adult children could outvote her and then have the body moved somewhere else. And there have been legal cases that have popped up over this. But after death, as far as disinterment is concerned, you need the adult children's consent on this. And it's such a weird thing. I've never understood it.
I've always thought it was always the cost that it was.
Yeah, there is that too. Yeah.
I did one last summer, and the guy's like, so price it all out. So price it out. I'm like, so to do everything and then bury your sister on top of it, you're looking at 80 grand to do everything. What? Because not mom stay in the crib.
80 grand?
80 grand because they had to take both parents out of the mausoleum that died in the 70s. Buy a new crypts in a mausoleum for 3, and they were selling them at like, I think, $8,000 a pop.
Wow.
Then the permit fees and this, it was just like, and I'm like, guys, like, you're making up. Like, you can go to the cemetery, you can talk to the cemetery, and she's going to tell you the same thing. And he calls back, and goes, oh my God, forget it. My sister, wow. Same cemetery I can visit, but not with mom and dad. I'm like, oh, it's crazy because it was like they were wooden caskets back then, so all disintegrated, so they have to buy new caskets and la 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 la. Oh, it was like ridiculous.
It's wild, man, when you get into it. People think it's a very simple process. It's not. I had a family contact me once, and they wanted to have like dad disinterred and then shipped to Poland. I was like, whoa, that's involved. Unfortunately, I left that funeral home and went to a different funeral home. So it was somebody else's problem. All right, so cremation. Now, with the crematory, you're going to see, and you probably saw a lot on the national about cremation,
Mhm.
especially on the art side of it. I know that's where they work in that whole bit. But yeah, the basics of crematory, the presence, you need a presence of a licensee, record keeping. And if you look at the statute, they have a whole breakdown of what the crematory needs to keep. And it's things like the name of the funeral home, the date of death, the name of the person, the next of kin, the disposition of the cremated remains, meaning that did you just give them back to a funeral director? Did you scatter them on their behalf? Did you do something like that? But all of that is located in there. With unclaimed cremated remains in New Jersey, and no funeral homes really do this. They should, but they don't. After 1 year, you need to make you do your due diligence, try and contact them. Normally they would send out like certified letters saying like, yes, I have the ashes of John Smith, and if you don't contact us, we are going to scatter them. You can't just take them and chuck them in the trash. You need to respectfully deal with them. And if you scatter them or whatever, you are within your legal rights. Now, funeral homes have been sued over this a bunch of times, so it's better to just hold on to them. But by the letter of the law, after 1 year, if you try and contact the family and they don't respond, you can just scatter them or bury them or whatever. So, okay, so here's just a bunch of changes and I doubt you're going to see anything on this. New for 2019 statement at the top. The statement is subject to change by agreement of both parties. Check boxes for sex removed because sex has gotten a little complicated over the past couple of years. Sanitary care without embalming has been changed to other prep of body, use of facilities and staff reviewing invitation. That is what it is now instead of just viewing. They added to use of equipment and staff for graveside to the line, including accompaniment of remains to place of final disposition. It may not be a graveside, it may be a crematory. They're just trying to update it all. Receiving or forwarding remains on different lines. Again, I don't think you'll see anything about that, but it is what it is. Optional package service section. If an optional package service is selected, categories 1 through 3 are not applicable. 2, if you select an optional package, see general price list for a list of included services. Now, this does not allow for, and this first question every funeral director asks, can I just write it up like direct cremation plus a memorial service? No, you cannot.
Right.
If you're doing any services on behalf of the family, you need to put in the general price, or I'm sorry, the basic service charge or removal charge. Everything else needs to be added in if you're doing any services. A direct cremation by FTC regulation only allows you to do just a direct cremation. That's a weird thing. I don't know why they changed the law. I think they were trying to do it this way, but federal law overruled them, and it is what it is, you know. Other wording changes, minor stuff, clergy or church, so officiant or place of worship, newspaper to obituary charge, pallbearers have been removed, but you're allowed to write them in. And price reduction removed. There used to be a little line in there, said price reduction. People were asking, like, why am I not getting a price reduction? So they just remove that altogether, and that can be written in for the grand total. So miscellaneous, where to file a DC. Remember, the death certificate can be filed in 3 places: the municipality of death, the municipality of the funeral home, and the municipality of the disposition. Right, so the cemetery or crematory, you can file it in any of those 3 municipalities. You can get them from the state, but they cannot file it at a state level. The idea being, like, I know I screwed up a death certificate once and put Riverside, but it was actually Delran, and the local registrar recognized that no, that's not right. Like, no, that's like Wayne Street is not actually Delran, it's actually Riverside. I was like, oh, okay, and I went back and changed it. So you can get the death certificates at the state level, but you cannot file them at the state level. The cost of the permit, $5, renting a funeral home to another. I don't know if you've ever dealt with this. People cheat on this all the time. The state board looks the other way. Your grandmother lives in another part of the state. You go, hey, Brand X Funeral Home. I'm not from there, but my grandmother died. Can I rent your funeral home? Oh yeah, it's fine. I'll be there. Yeah, okay, I'll be there Tuesday night. We'll have fine, whatever. You're supposed to send a letter to the state board requesting it and why you're requesting it. And they're supposed to give you approval for it. And a funeral director cannot do it. It's only the manager or owner of a funeral home that can do it. And the idea is you don't want Joe Schmo, funeral director who lost his job running ads saying, hey, just call me, call my cell phone when a death happens, and I'll try and call a local funeral home and set something up. No. You need to deal with a specific funeral home that has their paperwork, their GPL, their letterhead, and everything else. Right. So they're very strict on that. Oh, like I just said, they're not that terribly strict, but on paper, they're very strict about it. It has to be a funeral home owner or a manager that reaches out to another funeral home to rent them. And you're supposed to get a special use permit from the state board. And you can only do this 3 times a year. Other than that, if you're going to keep using that funeral home, then why don't you just get a funeral home in that area? Like,
Right.
Now receiving vault, this is a weird thing. A receiving vault, I didn't even know what this was when I first saw this. I had to call up my predecessor, Rob Smith, and go, what the hell is a receiving vault? It used to be in times when they couldn't dig into the ground because it was too cold. It was January or February. You couldn't dig into the ground in the cemetery. They would have a receiving vault. They would hold the body for 2 or 3 months and wait for everything to warm up and then dig into the ground at the time. It's an antiquated notion, but according to the state board, if you have a receiving vault and you have an unembalmed body, it can only be there for 48 hours unless it's been number 1 embalmed or the ground it's more than 5 feet underground or designed in a way that prevents noxious fumes from coming out. It's a very antiquated concept, but it is what it is. And then in 2016 or 2017, they did the dumbest thing ever. A family came in and looked at a body and there was duct tape around the arms holding down the plastic.
Oh, yeah, I heard about that one.
Remember that? Yeah. And they put in a complaint to the state board, and the state board said, well, you need clear, white, or flesh-colored adhesive tape at every funeral home. And we said, what the hell is flesh-colored adhesive tape? How do you define that? And they said, oh, each community can figure it out on their own. That's fine. They can figure it out on their own. What the hell? So you're supposed to have clear, white, or flesh-colored adhesive tape at every funeral home to hold down plastic. It was a dumb thing, man. It was really silly. So welfare versus Medicaid. Remember, we always say Medicaid funeral, but it's not. It's welfare. Know the amounts. And right now, the amounts jumped up to 3,000 something, but it's only until they run through that money. They were given a grant of some sort. And when they run through that money, it's going to go back to the 2246 or whatever it is. And remember, there's an amount for somebody 2 years old or older. There's somebody a newborn to 2 years and somebody that was a stillborn. And look at those numbers. They will pop up, and look at the current numbers as well as what they previously were. I highly doubt they would put both of those numbers onto a test question, but take a look for both. The forms for use is the WF NJ11. However, students have told me, and that's Work First New Jersey 11. Students have told me that they've still seen PA 11, which is Public Assistance 11, still pop up. So know both of them. WFNJ, which goes back to the Bush era, the second Bush, WFNJ or PA 11. And where's the claim submitted? It's claim at the county level. I know that down here in South Jersey, dealing with Camden County is a nightmare.
Yep.
Dealing with Burlington County ain't so bad. It's pretty easy, but it's done at a county level. So emergency burial permit, this does not pop up very much, but just the basic concept of it. If it was a long holiday weekend and you needed a burial permit for somebody that needed to be buried immediately, you could go to a judge and they would issue it for you. Ever since EDRS, this has sort of gone the way to do it over. If there's no person in charge of a cemetery, the funeral director is expected to file the paperwork. Communicable disease, I'll go through this list in just a bit. And reporting veterans' death. This is a weird one. If somebody dies outside of the state, right, and they are a veteran, and you're going to a cemetery that doesn't have anybody in charge of it, like a little municipal cemetery, one of the little old ones that you haven't buried in since 1975, let's say, the funeral director is expected to notify the VA regarding the decedent's death, because they would come out on Veterans Day and things like that, put flags on the graves. So you were expected to notify them of that. A very, very rare thing. Somebody died within the state, it's fine, because through the EDRS system, the VA would be notified. But if they die out of state and you're burying in a cemetery that doesn't have anybody in charge, now it falls to you as the funeral director to notify the VA in whatever county you're in. It's a weird thing. You'll probably never deal with that in your career, but it is what it is. It's on paper, so they ask questions about this crap. So EDRS, it is burial at sea. Take a look at it. You probably had a class similar to our principals class, and right in the beginning of it has a breakdown of burial at sea and how much ballast you need to put in the casket and how many holes need to be cut into it. Review that. It's just good to know before you go in to take it. Signatures, again, as a funeral director, the death certificate, disinterment, statement of funeral services, the FTC, the disclaimer. How many disclaimers do they have? They've got 6 on the statement of funeral goods. They've got 6 on the price list, excuse me, and 3 on the statement of funeral goods and services. And remember, in New Jersey, we're not allowed to mark up cash advances, but nationally, you're allowed to. So it's good to know that, and although that's not on any of our statement of funeral goods and services, it's good to know that because they can absolutely ask you questions about that. So Uniform Anatomical Gift Act, the idea that you can trump everybody and say, I'm giving my body away. And they have to follow that. If you fill the paperwork and say, yes, I want my body donated. And this also allows recipients, because we have an embalming lab at Mercer, and if a family called us up and said, I want the body back, I could say, no, go pound sand. I would never do that, but I could theoretically. We have a table at Mercer, which what it has is it has body, they're not physically body, they're digital reproductions of it. Well, what they would do is they would shave a body down like millimeter by millimeter, and it takes months to do, and they recreate them digitally, and then we can bring it up if you want to see the heart or whatever, right? But they can't be halfway through that process, and family goes, no, we decided we wanted a 2-day viewing for dad. So this is why the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act exists. Like, no, there are just times you can't give the remains back. So when people give us remains, they bequeath them to us. They don't just give them, that they bequeath us to them. So yeah, it's an important distinction. It's, victims of crime compensation is going to get paid through this. If God forbid somebody is killed over a violent crime. The basic concepts of medical waste, wills terminology, and I'm sure they walked you through that at McAllister, just the basic will stuff. All right, so here are the prohibited embalming compounds: arsenic, lead, mercury, zinc, silver, antimony, fluoride, any poisonous alkaloid, and then the statute includes copper and cyanogen. So know these. They may pop up. I remember I got questions about it. I'm going back 20 years. I don't know what's on the test today, but like I said, I gave you the notes on this, so it's something it's good to review. And then the communicable diseases, you're supposed to notify your local health department within 12 hours of receiving one of these. If you do, they will have no idea what to tell you. I guarantee it. I had a student that had a body with smallpox. They called the health department. They're like, wait, what do you want us to do? It's like, I don't know, but you're supposed to notify them within 12 hours. Smallpox, cholera, yellow fever, typhus, and plague. So these things, they can very well pop up in the tests.
Now, let me ask you, if
Sure.
I've seen this with, with all the COVID is, the hospitals have their communicable disease form already. So is that their notification?
Run that by me again, I'm sorry.
So the hospital, like hospitals up by us, and it's more so with COVID, because it's so prevalent. Anybody who was COVID positive or died of COVID, they sat there and had the communicable disease form right on the body bag and also with the paperwork when we did the removals from the hospitals. It's there's a hospital copy for funeral home, copy for Department of Health, copy for the funeral for the hospital. Is that the notification then?
No, because it's not, because that's not considered one of the communicable diseases. So it's one of those deals where it's just that was just them freaking out and notifying you that the person had COVID, and they needed to notify the health department because they were keeping track of how many people had, and they were also there's word that hospitals were getting a certain amount of funding based off of this, how many people got it. But no, it's a different thing altogether. It's completely different. If you get somebody with plague, they're not notifying the health department on your behalf. It's just you're supposed to notify them as a funeral director.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, so it's and again, I know, man, it was a bonkers time. It was a crazy 2 years, man. It was why do you think I have this microphone? I wouldn't own something like this otherwise. Spent all this time teaching from home. So yeah, so good questions about any of that. I just throw a whole lot at you.
No, that's good. No, it's I mean, I've been reading over this, the regs and stuff. I think I'm on the 4th round of reading them over the last 2 weeks. So, and again, I've been, from what I've been told from other funeral directors, because I've been working at the funeral home for 3 years, because this is day-to-day operation stuff. A lot of it is. So.
It is and it isn't. A lot of the stuff they pull from the back of it, and they pull weird questions out of it. You got through the national, God bless you. It's not as hard as that, but it is a difficult test. So look, review it. I'm going to post this onto our site, which is MCCC Funeral Service Program, I think is what it is on YouTube. And I make it public. So please feel free to download it. And, actually, I probably stopped taping. Hold on a second.